We are going to talk about the four P's: people, prosperity, peace, and planet today. And we will give around maybe 10 minutes for each of our speakers to comment on these issues. And after this, we'll open the floor for a few questions from the audience on this matter. I would like to start first with Young Balaga, Council Director, on this issue. I think, Tansiri, you have been quite well known to be one of the supporters of the idea of humanistic education. And there are many questions related to this approach. Many people talk about is this humanistic education will be different from the current education system, or to be a modification? And also, people try to compare it with other faith-based education, whether it's Christian or Buddhist or Islamic education, and also what people used to call as a secular education. So there's a bit of a confusion on this issue. So I would like you to elaborate on this approach of humanistic education and how it will impact the process of education itself, whether on the universities and even on the pre-university schools and other things.
Yeah. Thank you very much. From my point of view, when we talk education, it is about raising the standards of human living, bringing back human dignity, creating a peaceful environment, as we talked about in a larger sort of dimension of education. We can call it humanistic if you look at it from that overall sort of perspective. But certainly from an Islamic perspective, when you talk humanistic, you cannot devote yourself from the divine sort of dimension of education. That to me is implicit once you talk about humanistic education from the Islamic perspective. But to gather a kind of a global dimension or understanding, I tend to talk about humanistic education in the sense that everybody has the right for education. In other words, education is human right, and everybody must be able to go to a certain stage of education before they can participate in an active life as a human being, globally or otherwise. Yeah. So that it becomes a responsibility of education system, universities like ours, to ensure that everybody have got this right and deservingly so. So that is a kind of dimension that I take, and in this International Day of Education for this year, when we talk about human dimension, there's the people, the planet, prosperity, and peace, is how you connect those pieces. In other words, all this while when we talk about education, the other dimension wasn't as clear. How do we relate to the planet? Are we creating a society with shared prosperity where people are more equitable, or is it more disparity as we see today? And what is the outcome of this? I think this is the issue that I think it is important for us now to discuss, looking at the chaotic nature of what the world is today and moving forward. We thought we are in the 21st century, people are more educated, a lot more access to education, and we will have a different environment. But sad to say, 21st century is worse even in the previous century, the way I look at it. So it is incumbent for us now to actually look at what education is all about. So when I talk about people in this particular context, as I mentioned, is about humanity per se. How do you get in contact with all other cultures, all other values, and what are the common platform that you can work so that we can have this peaceful environment that we talked about. Beyond that, I think when we talk about this humanistic education, it's also not just about us as human beings, but also other creation, other species, the plants, the animal, that is part and parcel of the universe and it's part and parcel of the planet. How do you engage with them? In other words, how do we live in a natural environment that we are also respectful of the environment, and we can even use that as a source of knowledge for our own innovation and our own passage forward as far as education is concerned. So there is this link between us and our own species, the human being, us and other species around us, about 33 million of them, that we need to look into. How do we actually make that connection, and how do we actually live amicably with other species around us. In other words, preserving the planet as it were, and also make sure that nature is part and parcel of that education that we need to go into. Again, I think when I talk about humanistic, again, how do we then, as I've mentioned, create an equitable environment? In other words, this whole idea of developing countries is a concept that I think is gone. We need to revise this concept, which is developed, which is developing, and I tend also to think there is a notion of overdeveloped. Some country is almost overdeveloped, depriving other people of their rights to live with dignity and amicably. When you look at statistics, for example, it is well known now, United States of America perhaps is living on the resources of 5 planets. And that is not acceptable in this context of humanistic education, looking at the environment and sustainable development at the end of the day. But more importantly, with all this configuration that we're working on, are we coming up into a kind of an environment that everybody can live in peace and harmony, in equality with justice as the end point? And this is where I think this whole concept of Rahmatan lil Alamin for us in IUM become absolutely important. That is the final equation that we need at. Then how do you work the processes so at the end of the day we will arrive at that particular point. So for this particular period, I think we need to rethink. And if you look at this literature on this particular celebration of the Education Day, they invite us to rethink, to reimagine, and to even revise this whole concept of education. And for UNESCO, I think now we know that they've got these 4 pillars of learning: learning to do, learning to know, learning to be, learning to live together. And they've just added another one, learning to be. Learning to become, actually. Learning to become what? Learning to become sustainable, learning to become, this group of people who can live together in harmony and in peace. And that, I think, is the agenda that we must address in this university, particularly when we claim we are international and Islamic. What sort of agenda do you put forward to make sure that the paradigm of the future is actually the paradigm that meets the expectation of everyone? Not just the Muslims, not just Malaysia, but humanity as such, because Islam prescribed those kind of target for us to meet that. So it is a big kind of agenda for us. And I think we have got our own roadmap to say when we talk about leading the way. And I hope this leading the way is the one that puts us up front in trying to define some of these issues from our perspective that meets a global standard at the same time.
Thank you very much, Tansri. I think this roadmap, if we can call this, can be shared with many other institutions as well. So we can have a bigger platform of cooperation, inshallah. Now I'll move to Professor Unku Rabia. Actually, Prof. Rabia, you have been very active in research related to the Islamic economy and also classical economy as well. And if we observe now, we have a lot of discussion everywhere about competence over resources. And people talk about the scarcity of resources. Even, God forbid, some wars might erupt due to this. So how do you see the situation? And can really humanity have a kind of a shared prosperity based on economic principles? Or this can be a kind of a far-fetched idea. Nobody will reach to this one.
Okay. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. And good morning. First of all, I would like to thank Professor Walid for the very thought-provoking question. The first thing that I would like to address is you're trying to relate the issue of economy with the issue of scarcity of resources. So my take on this issue is basically, I believe this economic theory, that resources are scarce and limited, and therefore people have to compete in order to get a piece of these scarce resources. So in my view, I think this economic theory is a fallacy. It is not really correct. It is wrong. And because of the way this theory is being portrayed and the way people react to this theory, it creates a kind of tension between the people, because they think that the resources are limited, whereas the wants are limitless, and therefore they will have to fight to get those resources. If we go back to the Islamic perspective, I don't think this is the case, because from the Islamic perspective, we believe that God has created this universe, the contents of the universe, the heaven and the sky and the stars and the planets, including the people and the animals and the plants, the flora and the fauna. So God has created all these creations in proportions, and He has guaranteed in the Quran that to all the creatures He had created adequate sustenance. So I think there is this paradox. Although the resources are limited and there's a finite number of the resources, but God has guaranteed adequacy of those limited resources, because our wants also is not limitless. It becomes limitless because we cannot differentiate between what is our wants and what are really our needs. So that's why in Islam we stress a lot on proportionality, about balance, about mizan. So basically, in addressing this issue, I think the new thoughts in the economy is basically we just use what we need and not just all that we want. So basically, if we discuss about social security, about prosperity for all, there's all this metrics that they're proposing. Basically, the 4 metrics. Basically, the metrics of the first metric is basically what we need and what we want. So if it is something that we need, like health, education, nutrition, the things that we need and we also want. So in this situation, the whole system should support the need that we wanted and further incentivize it so that people continue to get what they need and they want. Okay. But there's also the second metrics. We need that thing, but perhaps we don't want it because of lack of knowledge and lack of awareness that this is something that we need. Okay, for example, when we talk about healthy eating, like vegetables, nutrition, it may not be appropriate to our taste buds, so we don't like it, we don't want it. So we want something which is not healthy for us. So in this situation, we need to re-educate people, make them relearn that actually these are things that are good for them. And even the good things has its own limits as well, because in the verses of the Quran, we read a lot about taking something, but do not be extravagant in taking even the good things. So it's about halal and tayyib. Okay, so the second metric is it is necessary for us, but we don't want it. Religion is necessary for many of us, for all of us actually, but many people don't want religion. So we need to educate them. Okay, so in this situation, we need to re-incentivize and re-educate people so that they really want what they need. Okay, that's the second metric. The third metric is we want something that we don't need. Okay, we want a lot of things in life, but we don't really need them. Actually, it may be needed by the future generation. We don't need it now. We are overusing things, common goods. Like fishes in the ocean, grains. We are over harvesting all these common goods to the extent that it's no longer sustainable. I mean, people in the future, they are depleted of all these things because we overuse it. We are wanting more than what we need. So in this situation, what we should do is we disincentivize people from wanting what they don't need. Okay? We have to re-educate them that we don't need these things. We have to save this for the future, for other people. And this is in a sense what the Prophet himself educated his companions. Okay, one of the companions was taking wudu, and he's excessively using water in the eyes of the Prophet. And the Prophet told him, do not be wasting the water. And the companion was amused. He said, well, is there a form of wastage in doing ibadah? The Prophet said, yes, even if you do wudu at a river and you use more than what you need, this is wastage. Okay. And now, given the time, I'm going to look at the fourth matrix. The fourth matrix is about something that we don't need and we don't want. Okay, so which is good. So we have to further reinforce this and educate people. Yes, this is something that you don't want and you don't need it, so you don't have to pursue over it. So we have to allocate resources to what we actually need and what we actually want. Okay, so that's the first thing. So I want to actually challenge this whole theory of scarcity. I don't think there is scarcity, there is adequacy. And in Islam, we talk about ghina, al-ghina against al-faqru. So ghina basically means feeling satisfied with what we have, although it is limited, but we are satisfied because it meets our needs in accordance to to what is proper for it. Okay, and the al-faqru is actually feeling of poverty and inadequacy when even if you are rich, but because if you don't feel satisfied, you will forever craving for more. So like the Prophet is said, if a person is given 2 mountains of gold, he would actually wanted to have a third one.
Yeah.
So this is al-faqru, this is poor in the eyes of Islam, okay, not just poor in the normal understanding. So that's my first take on the topic, and I will leave it at there for the moment.
Thank you very much, Professor Rabia, for this. I think the key words in what you have said is this idea of scarcity is a big fallacy. And the main approach that we need to have this shared prosperity is balance.
Yes.
These are the key words. And education will play a big role in introducing this to people. I'll move now to our colleague, Dr. Amani. Dr. Amani, you have been working on many issues. I know you are active in NGOs and community service and also research as well. And also you have a very interesting experience working with the team in NASA for a while. So how you look at the issue of the planet because of this wide perspective, how people can sustain this planet, and also mainly how education, practically, whether in research or in the teaching, we can educate people about the sustainability of the planet. Please.
Thank you for that question. First of all, I think that I have to agree with the two panels about the mentality of scarcity, meaning that we always think that things are not adequate for us and everything is not enough. So we keep having to basically wanting for things that we might not need. So I go for the mentality of abundance. I keep talking about this, meaning that when we share more things will come to us. And this is in line with what is taught about even in the Islamic perspective, is that sharing your resources is actually something that I think what the West has failed. So I come from 18 years work in the United States. And when I look into our countries, the developing countries, in relative to my experience in the United States, is that I found that we are in a bit better position. I tell why. To save the planet. We in a position where we can skip all the technology that the West have done that destroyed the planet. We don't need to do all that. We know that it's not good, it's destroying the planets, and we're in the stage where new technologies can come out, which is more sustainable, that can help in improving the planet, and can skip all the mistakes that the West have done. So I think the developing countries are in that better position. And this is why the reason I came back, because I think that we are in that better position. So talking about creating planets, a safe planet for all. See, I have a sore throat. Okay, you know that recently there is this virus, Wuhan coronavirus going on. Okay, so I'm recovering from a small portion of that, and you can see from this perspective is that this virus comes from a place where there's a 1.3 billion population. Okay, so what happened? So you have to feed this population, right? So agriculture and so forth has become monoculture and so forth, which spreads these diseases. And because of that is that the planet cannot sustain because we trying to feed people, but at the same time we're also destroying the planet's consequence of our action. So how do we go about this? So as a scientist is that if you can see when the virus come out is that you heard about a group of European scientists come up with a diagnostic test right away to solve this issue. So it's sort of like there's a problem, but there's also scientists and technologies and so forth that can solve the problem. So it means that we really rely on knowledge and education and the science to prosper to solve these issues. At the same time, science and technology are also used to basically create the issues. So we're in that two things that we need to balance. That's why in Islamic perspective, Rahmatan al-Alamin is about that balance. We need to create that balance. So how do we create that balance? So anyway, I've read about, if you heard about Greta, she went to the Davos, World Economic Forum. She's very angry, right? A young child, very angry. Of course, people said to her that her anger is baseless. Well, maybe she has a base for her anger because everybody is basically scared. People do not know what is the next solution from all of these things that happens to our planet. And because of that, the reason why countries such as the United States and the West and so forth, they still do not give up on the R&D. But do they have the solution to these problems? Maybe not. Maybe yes. We don't know, right? So everybody is all in this search together. When I come back to Malaysia was that what I see is that the perspective I did for my research in NASA in the United States changes as I come back to the developing country. Why? The first place I went to is Kuala Kelantan when it was hit by the flood in 2014. When I look is that, okay, you know, there's water that needs issues. People need to know there's pathogens in the water and so forth, right? These people are basically in NGOs and building filtration system near the rivers and so forth. So what does technologies come in? Well, we build the membrane system, we bring the sensors and so forth at the location, which the solutions I come up with, I cannot think at NASA. I can think of that because I was in Malaysia. Therefore, the new set of problems and solution exists in this part of the world. So this is something that I think that as a scientist and technologist is that sometimes, you know, being at a place in the developing countries, you see more of the things that you can solve. So looking back into how do we use technology? If you look at Malaysia, we have abundance, really. We do have abundance, right? We have, you know, oil and gas industry strive and so forth, you know, but the question is, how do we decarbonize the economy, right? Since I came back to Malaysia, for example, I don't believe in owning cars because I live in Kuala Lumpur and there's public transport from my place to UIA. You use a public transport, okay? Maybe I'm a privileged person because I live in a place near public transport. Not so for the rest that live so far away that needs to use a car. But maybe we need to look at, you know, to basically improve our public transport so that we can basically reduce the use of cars. Because the key is that it's easier to basically put more carbon in the environment, okay, than taking it out. Okay, it's always the case like that. So how do we reduce that? UIA has done wonderful job when we first started the program of reduce, you know, and reuse and then recycle. Okay, we did that for the plastics. But in my point of view, that is good, but maybe we need to think about waste management. Because a lot of times, sometimes reduce, reuse, and recycle might need a better management of the waste. Because a lot of the countries that I went to, such as Japan, for example, they still use plastic, but then the way they manage it, you know, it is great. So one of the things I see is this. There's communities in Malaysia, okay, which I work with and know, is that we use these recycled plastics to build things that we can use. For example, a bag and so forth. I don't use a Chanel bag or a Dior bag anymore because I use a bag that is done by the local communities. If we don't change the way we use things, okay, and the way we basically at our daily basis, practices we do at our daily basis, is basically start from that one person. So talking about the education, humanistic education, can only prosper and so forth if that one person can say, okay, I'm going to make a change, therefore it's a domino if everybody else is going to make that change too. In terms of energy, we look at consumption of energy. It's very hot in Malaysia. There's a big reason why the heat increased because it's only two things in science, is that the energy from the sun and also how the atmosphere deals with the energy from the sun, right? So there's many ways that I think that technology and also can do it, but the most important is human being, how they can do it. For example, at homes, okay, it's hot, so we tend to use the air condition, but your body as human being adapts to environment. Really, we are wonderful creatures. We basically adapt to environment. I cannot stand when I first came back to Malaysia because it was so hot. But then I train myself to turn off the AC and just use the, you know, regular environment. I can adapt and I feel cooler now because I don't need to use the AC. Human beings be so good at adapting into things. And another thing is I just want to tell is that in terms of adapting into things is that I think that the developing countries in a good positions where we are in a place where we can find solutions because we are the environment and the location. where allows us to be creative and come up with new technologies that the West can't do. I truly believe that, because a lot of solutions that I came up right now and with my colleagues is because we live in Malaysia and we live in this part of the world. So thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Ramani. I think, again, the key words in what you have said is change of human behavior mainly. And education is all about changing human behavior at the end of the day and how we perceive things. And it goes along with what Professor Rabia and Tansiri mentioned. Coming now to the dream of everybody, peace. Everybody looking for peace, and all the philosophers all over history talked about a peaceful city and the peaceful state and this type of things. So, Dr. Ahmed, you are an expert on violent extremism and other issues related to this. And it became a bit, the world became a bit fluid about who is extreme, who is not extreme, and how people can live together and how people can work together. And you have a very interesting approach. I know that you are interested in changing this through education. So not everything can be changed through security measures and other things. So education will play a key role. So can you elaborate on this thing? Is peace a far-fetched also dream? Or it can be reached, and there are some practical steps that we can take so we can live all together, we can have a common understanding and this type of things.
Yeah, thank you very much, Professor Walid, my co-panelist and respected audience. Yes, first of all, we can see that the threat to global peace today is extremism. And when I speak about extremism, I do not refer to any specific group, a specific nation, a specific religion. To me, we can see the extremism existed in many societies, in many religions. Right now, if you go to Europe, you can see that the white supremacy group in the States, shooting by the white supremacists in New Zealand, the massacre in Paris, in Belgium, and even in our region, in our country as well, in Malaysia, we can see that some people are having held an extreme view of things. For the past many years, since I remember since February 2013, Malaysian police have arrested more than 400 people for involving in terrorism-related charges. And even before that, since 2001, after 9/11 until 2012, 289 people, members of Kumpulan Mujahidin Malaysia, Jemaat Islami, Al-Qaeda group, they were detained here under the Internal Security Act. And after the Syrian conflict happened, some Malaysian traveling to Syria, more than 100 people. I do not hear anyone actually involved in suicide bombing Malaysian people before. But since Syrian conflict took place, we have Malaysian suicide bomber. We have those Malaysians who are slaughtering people and video and record them and posted in the YouTube. This is unprecedented to me. And then we can see the same phenomenon across the world. So this is very, very, very dangerous threat to the world peace. So when we speak about the context of what they call extremism in the context of education, I view education as the source of the self-empowerment and also development of human capital. Because based on my experience, when I interview those people who are involved in extremism, those who are detained here, and I also have opportunity to speak to them in UK, for example, or in Indonesia, in Philippines, they share a common problem. They have a problem, they have vulnerabilities. I call this individual vulnerabilities at 4 areas. So we have to empower them in 4 dimensions. Number one is empowering the mind, especially developing strategic and critical thinking, empowering emotion because they are vulnerable emotionally, psychologically, they're affected, they do not have emotional resilience to face difficulty in life, to face pressure, the reality of war, the reality of the economic difficulties in their countries, for example, and things that they have seen, experienced in their life. For example, those Syrian refugees who came here, for example, they've been exposed to war, a very, very traumatic experience. So how can we help them actually to overcome this kind of traumatic experience? And empowering spirituality, We are living in the age where everything is materialism, reign, I would say. The Reneganon won the 21st century's generation, the reign of quantity. The quality is over. So people getting more materialistic and devoid of religion, devoid of ethics, devoid of religious value. This actually inhumanistic. That is not human. So empowering spirituality is also important. And number 4 is empowering skill and expertise for survival. This is another dimension of that. So this is the focus of education that actually Malaysian government is actually trying to implement in the context of rehabilitation militancy in this country. But we also need to remember, if you look at in history, education is very important in the peace building or the post-war reconstruction.
Yeah.
If you look at the experience of Bosnia, I think it's provide a very good example how education actually has sustained peace in Bosnia. When they experienced war in 1990s, many students, many people from Bosnia came to Malaysia, and some of them become a student here, and they study. And after the war is over, they went back to develop their countries and to contribute back to the development of Bosnia. And if you look at the ambassador of Bosnia today in Malaysia, he was a student of our university. So this is the impact of education. And if you compare this country, for example, in Afghanistan, they experienced a very long period of war, 79, 89, and after that, continuous extended war, and also in Iraq. There is no investment in education is done. And that country is stuck in the cycle of violence until today. And you also can see the same thing happen in Bosnia, in Mindanao, the nearby here, in southern Thai, and in this region. When education is not actually being the focus of the state, then the state would be facing a problem. However, I should also mention this point. Education not only important in the post-conflict reconstruction programs, but it is also important during peacetime. In Malaysia, for example, I observed that in the past 10 years, there was a religious radicalization. The groups such as Al-Qaeda group, Jamaah Islamiyah, and right now Daesh is recruiting people. They're recruiting students too, which is very unfortunate. We have some students involved. We even have lecturers involved, teachers involved. Sometimes I went to court to testify in the cases related to terrorism. I sometimes feeling difficulty looking at the young man who was about to be persecuted because of things that they have done, but they do not know about it. So we have to look into this religious radicalization. But unfortunately, recently, we also have seen the rise of political radicalization. We also need to tackle this. So the best way for us to do is education. We have to teach our people the value of peaceful coexistence, the peace education, the value of tolerance, the value of wasatiyah, and the value of rahmatal lil alamin mentioned by our rector just now. And we have to utilize and we have to make use of the diversity that we have in this country. We are multiracial society, multicultural, multi-religious society. We have to make use of this strength. We have to make use of this diversity as the source of strength, not as a source of conflict. Only then we can have sustainable peace. And I would like to close my sharing this morning with the word by the Bertrand Russell, who said that love is wise and hatred is foolish. And I think that is actually constitute the foundation of peace. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Ahmed. I think this is a very eloquent approach to the issue of peace. And I think the key words that you have mentioned is how education will play a key role, whether in the post-traumatic era, whatever it's a war or an internal conflict, or even during the peacetime. And people need to have a protective measures by working hard during the peacetime, not to face a traumatic time later. I think this is a very important point that we need all to look into it. Thank you very much. Thank you very much for our panelists. And after this, we'll entertain a few questions from the audience in a while. Yeah, please.
I'd like to get back to the topic of climate crisis. And the organizations, we saw last year that it was that kind of rise because of this topic you already mentioned, Greta Thunberg. And what do you think is the role of the Muslim youth with this regard?
We'll take all the questions first, and then we'll go for a final round of second question. Yes. Salam alaikum.
This is a very big appreciation to all the panelists and thank you to all the audiences. My question is a bit special, specifically directed to from the finance. So she talked about what we want and what we need. So I wanted to ask, we've seen Islamic finance and compared to conventional finance system, but it's not properly adopted yet. Most people are skeptical by the word Islamic, the Islamic or Islamization. So I wanted to ask, what is your view on how Islamic finance can help with in terms of wealth distribution, in terms of justice, and in terms of equality generally as a whole?
We can entertain another question maximum, and then because of the time, please. Yeah. No.
My name is Sadia. I'm from Pakistan. So my question is about peace building. I'm a psychology student, and we experience with a lot of students who come from Syria or different war-zone areas, and we see that even when we try to educate them, they're at a point in life where people who have seen so much trauma that it's very hard for them to come back and just be educated like normal people. So we see that a lot of cases of extremism come from people who have been very traumatized. So we think that there might be a different kind of education that we need to come up with for different kind of people in war zone areas, and maybe digital revolution could really help people or ordinary people to contribute in peace building as well. So I'd just like to hear more about some practical steps or how we can be careful in terms of digital revolution and to contribute into peace building. Thank you.
No, thank you very much. I will ask the panel starting from Tansri to address in not more than 5 minutes to 4 minutes, in all these 3 questions from your own perspective. So I might start with Tansri.
Okay, thank you for those questions. I would want to start again from the perspective of the human person, and I think I would like to start from the individual as such. I mean, before we talk about what the Muslim can do, what can we do as a human being? I think that's the thing that connects us. The Islamic perspective may come later, but we have to understand that there is common values that all of us share, regardless what faith, what race, where geographical location you are. What can we do as a human person? And when we talk about the many things that we talk about, extremism, for example, we tend to talk about ideological, political extremism. What about economic extremism? How can a person own so much when the others are not getting it at all? What about education extremism? How come people can get better education when the rest are deprived? So this kind of imbalance, I think, needs to cut across the board. We tend to talk about the political dimension because that is what is been hyped all the times by the media, Western media particularly. But from my point of view, I think this whole world is in a state of inequilibrium. The mizan is lost somehow. And I think our responsibility is to look at education and how to bring back this mizan, how to bring back this equilibrium in all dimensions, and particularly starting with ourselves. If the individual can be balanced, if the individual can experience peace, if the individual can actually cope, then I think we are in a better perspective to move forward. The whole perspective of talking about, for example, when we talk about extremism, is just about the Muslims. There are other extremism. The Buddhists are extremism. Christianity has been extremism for a long time. And there's a book called The Armies of God that talked about extremism around the world, which is ushered by the Zionist Christians. But this has not been talked about. And they are working very, very subversively. It's almost beyond the radar that we don't see it. And we tend to focus only on the thing that has been hyped out. And I think our responsibility is to look at all these varieties of extremism from one end to another and start to redefine it. Yeah? So the whole notion of this International Day of Education is starting to revise again. what education is in the 21st century and beyond, the education system that we have inherited coming from the Industrial Revolution, where the shift is actually making everything skewed. Now we are talking about the Anthropocene Age. For a long time before the Industrial Revolution, we're talking about the Holocene Age, where we human beings built civilization across the board and enjoying it. The Anthropocene Age talks about how we human beings are destroying those civilizations because all the value systems that we inherited from the Industrial Revolution per se, quote unquote, has brought in so much of imbalance and chaotic thinking in this particular respect. So I tend to think that if we start from a notion that everybody is equal, and then bring in the value system that we talked about and start to learn how to cope. When we talk about extremism, fine, we see them, but in our campus alone, there is this extremism in the sense that everybody now is experiencing a kind of an emotional suppression. You know, the kind of anxiety, the kind of depression, the kind of suicidal tendency is getting more and more. And that to me is a form of extremism. What does it mean? It means we are losing control of our own coping mechanism as human beings. And this is where I think faith-based then becomes a solution. Islam certainly brings a solution to it. And how do you put this into the curriculum is a challenge that all of us must meet head on, whether we like it or not.
Thank you very much, Dr. Sri. Prof. Rabia, also your take on the three questions, or to address any of the questions, especially the question on Islamic finance.
Okay, thank you to the participants who have posted interesting questions just now. Actually, the question that was posted to me require a whole lecture on its own. But I will try to address bits and pieces of that and try to relate it also to some of the other questions that have been raised earlier. So first of all, we talk about how Islamic finance contribute towards this idea of economic equality and equilibrium in the society, as well as improving the level of prosperity in the society. What I can say is perhaps the first and foremost contribution is the fact that Islamic finance is attempting to eliminate riba, eliminate the element of usury and interest and riba in a sense. And like I said, it requires a full lecture to explain why riba is harmful. But it suffices to say and point out that if you look at the way the economy has been developing in the past decades, we see a lot of instability, right? There was actually a big gap and imbalance between the financial market and the real economy. And many people suggested actually the element of riba actually contributes to this imbalance because it creates a perception that there are a lot of money in the financial market, but this money in the financial market is in the trillions of dollars. It's not really supported by the performance in the real economy. Who's going to pay for the obligations in the financial market? From the real economy, right? So if the real economy is stressed out because of that, partly because of the whole thing that's happening in the economy, climate change and whatnot, and also in addition to that, the stress of having to pay the interest. So the real economy is not will not be able to pay for the obligations in the financial economy. So it's like an upturned pyramid. So it's not stable, and this is clearly mentioned in the Quran. Basically, the verse is Yamhaqullahu riba. Allah actually take away it destroys it. Basically, riba is self-destructive. So we see the credit crisis, we see the LIBOR fraud. These all are indications of how self-destructive is a riba-based system. And then when we talk about Islamic finance, after it takes out riba, it's actually a challenge for Islamic finance to move beyond riba and really move towards the fair and balanced economy. So this is something that is still a work in progress. I have to admit that, because of the environment in which Islamic finance is growing, to some extent they have to converge with the way conventional finance is being done. But after 2 or 3 decades of existence, I think now Islamic finance is trying to push forward with its real characteristics in order to come out with what they call Islamic Finance 2.0 or even to Islamic Finance 3.0. So this is actually reflected in the, for example, the initiative like value-based intimidation. So under value-based intimidation, we are talking about not only we are eliminating riba, but the way we intermediate the financial and the economy is value-based. What is meant by that? So that is meant by the fact that whatever we actually do in our financial intimidation, it should be benefiting to the society, to the planet, as well as towards more prosperity. So also under the value-based intimidation, for example, we are focusing on entrepreneurship, we are focusing on education, we are focusing on empowering the community. Okay, a simple example that I can think of is what have been done recently in Kenya, where there have been a project to actually see how the zakah system, which is also part of Islamic social finance, how the zakah system can help to address the impact of climate change to one of the poorest districts in Kenya, which is the Kitui district. As we know, the climate change caused global warming. And this particular district in Kenya, they rely a lot on a particular grain in order for their food. And because of the climate change, there's a lot of drought. And corn can no longer be sustainably cultivated in most places in Kenya. So, so if they were to continue to plant corn, it will not work. They cannot get the crops that they want. And this together with learning and education, so we have move where they call it research being done on crops for the future. Because the current crops may not withstand the climate change, so we have to introduce a new type of crops. So based on the research, they found that actually they require a particular grain known as green gram, that will be suitable for that area in Kenya. And it will be able to withstand the weather, the hotter weather and the drought, and will be able to produce enough food for the people. So in order to finance this project, they get zakah money. Interestingly, it comes from Perlis, one of the states in Malaysia. And this is done in collaboration with the International Federation of Red Cross and Red Crescent Society. So they get this a few million from Perlis, from zakat money, and they pump into buying the grains, the seeds for the green gram, and they distribute it to the farmers in Kitu. And before they can accept to do that and they're able to plant, they have to train and educate the people on how to cultivate the new crops. And this project actually is very successful. They planted the green gram. It's true, it can withstand the weather. And it actually produced from that, couldn't remember, 1 kilogram, they actually get triple the amount of what initially has been given to them. So that actually allowed them first, they have food, so they don't have hunger anymore. Secondly, because it's triple the amount that has been invested in them, they insisted on paying back the seeds that they have obtained and also help the neighboring village. So this can be repeated in another village. So you can see if we consciously try to match and bridge between the financial economy and the real economy, then we can see real results that can be geared towards overcoming issues of climate change, even the conflict zones, the post conflict zones. This can be due to war, due to natural disaster. A lot of financial instruments can be developed in order to address, whether in terms of humanitarian aid, in terms of educational help and whatnots, through all these financial instruments, where we can actually say that we have done something and we feel proud of that we are actually contributing something to the humanity. And to conclude my answer, I would like to allude to this particular surah in the Quran. I think we always read this surah to Quraysh, right? In this surah, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala actually narrates the story of the Quraysh. And if you look at the Quraysh, what is very outstanding about the Quraysh at the time when the Prophet ﷺ was there, was actually, it is a very much trading society. So the words describe the Quraysh as their trade caravans that goes from the north and the south, from Sham and Yemen, and how this trading activity has provided sustenance to the people of Mecca, And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala asked them to be thankful because Allah has given them two main virtues. The verse mentioned about وَأَطْعَمَهُمْ مِنْ جُوعٍ وَآمَنَهُمْ مِنْ خَوْفٍ. Allah has provided them food to satisfy their hunger, and Allah has actually given them peace that can overcome all the fears that they have. So in order to have an economic activity, you need to have food security, you need to have peace, right? So both are accorded to these people of Mecca at the time, despite the fact that it is a valley which is in the middle of nowhere. It was described in the earlier words that actually it is valley void of water, void of plantation, void of vegetation, void of people. But through the dua of Prophet Ibrahim alayhi salam, we see how Allah has caused a spring to come out in the way of Zamzam, and how people come and all those things. And there's abundance of fruits, and people come, and there are a lot of things that happens after that. So of course, I will actually, if time permits, I would want to actually discuss about food security and how we can learn from the lessons of Prophet Yusuf alayhi salam, how he addressed the issue of famine, how he actually managed to provide food security to the people, and how the management of a person with Hafiz and Alim, who is not only trustworthy but also knowledgeable, are capable of doing such. But I don't want to be unjust to the other speaker in the panel, so I will stop there for the moment.
Thank you very much, Professor Rabia, for this. Dr. Amani, your take on the question, especially about the climate?
I'll take the question on the youth. Because youth is very dear to me. My father used to say to me, if you want to spend most of your time, spend most of your time educating the youth. And I think because how we educate the youth and how they are now determines our future. So to answer that question regarding what is the role of youth to actually help in terms of sustainability, address the issues of climate change and so forth, it's good that Greta is one young girl that brought this attention to the world leaders. However, I think being angry alone and so forth needs also other actionable items that needs to be done so that this huge issue can be solved together as a humanity. I like what the rector said, that first start with the human, because we have common values that ties us together. I've never seen a human being who would like to say, you know what, I'm fine being poor, or I'm fine being hungry. No. We want to have a good life. We want to have a good family. We want to basically prosper, in this world, in this life. So in terms of youth, I think that some of the things that I would like to suggest, I would suggest to my students also, is actually to be involved. Be knowledgeable, meaning that you have to basically receive and take education. It's very, very important. I give an example, for example, education for girls. Okay, you said the world population is going up. Okay, when a society is basically prosperous and rich and so forth, the world population will stabilize. The reason it keeps going up and so forth, you can see it's a lot in a poverty-stricken nation. There's war and so forth. So girls are not educated, women are not educated, and so forth. So then you will have, all these issues of increase and disproportionate population of the world, and the earth cannot take it. Okay? Education for me is very, very important in terms of the youth needs to be knowledgeable about the policy that relates to the climate change. Policy, regardless of the policy regarding in their own university, in their own community, you need to know. You cannot say, I don't want to be involved. This is nothing relating to me. I think we can't afford to have that anymore. I think each and single person of us needs to be involved and know what's going on around them. So this is number one, education is very, very important. So I keep telling to my students is that, yes, you want to be Bill Gates, but first get that A in your class. Okay? Try to do well in your class, because not everybody needs to be Bill Gates. And not everybody should be Bill Gates. Not everybody can be Bill Gates. Okay? We can be a Dr. Amani, we can be Tan Sri Zul, we can be the panels here. We all are contributing to the same cause. Diversity, I like that from the other panel. I think diversity is very, very important. I think students, the youth needs to go out and see people, societies that are different than them. I remember during the time, okay, when I was a student, okay, that time it was basically in the United States, there was Katrina. Okay, you heard about the hurricane, the floods and so forth. We went there and we helped with the community. When we were there, because we're science student, engineering student, we come up with solutions and empower the community to solve their solutions. So I think that even maybe we need to rethink back. Does our education and the way we do education right now maybe needs to be revised, okay, to address all these challenging issues, because we can't be expecting a different results doing the same similar things. Okay, so this is maybe something that the youth can basically have to give feedback, okay, to the communities, to the leaders, and so forth. Another thing is that I think that the youth can be involved, okay, is this is really, really powerful that I found that really, really, that I encourage them is that if, you know, they can take, okay, because youth, you know, when you're gone, you can't ask for the youth to come back. You have the energy, you have the enthusiasm, you have the time, okay? Because I said, look at Dr. Amani, I said to my students, we go to meetings, five meetings a day. You don't have all these meetings. You can do a lot of meaningful work that can actually help in the mission to actually you know, help the planet and so forth, and create sustainability and so forth. So what they can do is that basically to work with the local communities. For example, the best invention that I found is when there is a need for the invention. I give an example. When we did pitch your product at UIA in 2017, best inventions come from kids, okay, at their communities where they wake up each morning and see that they need to help their parents basically plant the trees and so forth. They come up with an invention. That invention comes from the heart, the soul. That is different than an invention. Say, I'm going to build a satellite and launch an NASA. I don't know. The satellite is for this, to find out about, you know, how plant cells sense gravity. But then creating that invention to basically solve the problem that you're facing each day is very, very important. Creativity can come out from that. And I think the youth has that time and energy, enthusiasm to come up with such invention. So I think that empowering the youth is not just, you know, we like to show, you know, we disagree or do something, but we need to basically walk the talk, do the actions, and be involved in the community.
Thank you very much, Dr. Amani. Dr. Ahmed, also your take on the question, especially about the last question concerning the traumatic experience that people passing through and how this can be dealt with through education.
That's right. It's traumatic indeed. I come across with a similar kind of people a few times. Recently, there was two ladies from Syria coming back to our country. She followed her husband going to conflict zone, and her husband died, and she came back here. Traumatic experience. But I'm very optimistic that even though she faced a very traumatic experience in the battlefield, heard this drop of the bombing on the regular basis and daily, and actually many people in the neighborhood was killed. But I believe that it is treatable because of we have to focus on the empowering them, maybe the 4 dimensions as I mentioned earlier. I believe that if we empower them mentally, empower them emotionally, empower them spiritually, and with a certain skill that they need, I'm sure that they can overcome that. And I think that because the question was asked by the student here, I think it is also could be a good subject of study for them as well. When there's a student, for example, who is doing postgraduate studies, perhaps that we can find a solution for this problem. Let's say we have a refugee here in Malaysia. We go, what they call a Syrian refugee, and many people are coming to Malaysia to seek refuge, which is a very good thing. I think we can provide them protection. We also can actually study about their problem and come up with a solution. So students from psychology, for example, they can make use of this opportunity to understand their problems and also to come up with a solution. This is actually what I did during my postgraduate studies, when we have the problem of extremism in this country. And the Malaysian authorities try to find out the people, who is the person who can do this. And they try to find it, that no one is quite willing to do it because it's quite risky. It's involved testifying in court, which is will be subjected to harms and physical harms to you and your family. But I took up the challenge. I said that I want to try. And it is quite useful because we give us an opportunity to engage with the actual issue. I think in the same spirit that Dr. Amani mentioned just now, we face the problems. So what is the role of education institution? Perhaps education institution or the Institute of Education in UAE should come up with a peace education subject,
Very good.
for example.
Mm.
And the students are encouraged to study about the problem that we are facing here and to come up with a solution. This is the role of education, and I think that this is going to make our university relevant to humanity. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Ahmed, for your comment. I would like to thank again our panels for today. Very fruitful discussion and very meaningful points. Thank you again, Professor Emeritus Tansri Zulkifli Abdulrazak, our director. Thank you again, Professor Onko Rabia, and also Dr. Amani, our colleague, Dr. Ahmed, for your presence here. And I would like to tell everybody that we are not providing answers, but actually we are providing more questions, and we are providing a kind of a motivation and interest for people to work on. These type of discussions cannot provide answers to everything, but only provides guidelines, ways to look into it. And it's a collective effort at the end of the day to come up with solutions. And this is the role of education. All of us are involved and all of us need to come up with a solution. Thank you very much. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Alaikum assalam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.